We are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret society, opposed to secret oaths, opposed to secret proceedings, secret proceedings. No official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know.
Welcome to Conspiracy Corner Podcast, everyone. This is Abe, your host. It is 6 a.m. Wednesday, May the 18th, 2022. Well, I just got off work. It was a pretty chill night. They finally hired somebody who actually works pretty fast, but he's batshit crazy. Apparently the dude was in the break room because I go out to smoke and so does another coworker, and the dude was in the break room slamming his fists on the tables, yelling about how he wasn't able to get weed today, which I thought was pretty crazy. And then I went back in the room to do something later on in the night. The dude was talking about how he's got to go try to get his driver's license again. He lost his driver's license because he was dealing drugs. I don't know. And the dude's like brand new. He's a fast worker, but apparently like he has no filter. He just shares everything that's on his mind, like to our boss and everything. So I thought that was pretty crazy. That and like just getting everything done quickly and like, oh, so I get to go home early now? And it's like, no. Like, no one gets to go home early. We got to stay and do more work. Like, I don't know. We'll see if he lasts. But I'm not bitching because it's help for me, and I haven't had help for a while now. As far as anything else as an update, we had another coworker that came in late. Apparently in the town that I work in, called Nicholasville, some dude, there's this like stretch of highway called New Circle, and some dude, the road was all backed up because some guy blew another guy's brains out on the highway. So yeah, I don't know, I just thought that was crazy. I figured I'd share it with you. But as far as updates, that's about it, man. Nothing really much going on today. I'm off today. Me and Sammy might go out. We're supposed to get some thunderstorms is what I heard. But if not, we might go out and go to this thing. She really wants to go to this, like, I forget what they call it. It's some type of garden where you go through and you pay a certain amount and you can pick all the vegetables or food or strawberries, berries, whatever you want. You just pick them and they weigh it, and yeah, I don't know. It's something she's been wanting to do. It gets us out of the house. I mean, I'm not really too into it, but she is. So happy wife, happy home, you know. But I don't know. It should be fun, I guess. But yeah, let's get on with the show. Today we are covering Operation Fishbowl. The reason why this is kind of an episode for the flat earthers. I'm actually not a flat earther, but I'm not married to the ball either. I'm not a round earther either. I'm kind of agnostic. I do lean flat if I have to lean in a certain direction. But basically, the flat earthers always bring up Operation Fishbowl as, from the way I've heard them describe it, as they were trying to blow up the dome. Because apparently flat earthers believe in a dome. I believe in like the Van Allen radiation belt, or as the ancient Egyptians used to call it, Nuit, which is a goddess that basically surrounds whatever we're on, whether it's flat or round Earth. Um, in the Bible, they call it the firmament. But apparently, the U.S. government was trying to blow up the dome, aka the firmament, with nuclear bombs, and it was called Operation Fishbowl. So, if you're a flat earther, you'll enjoy this. If you're not, hey, just take it as a history lesson. But today we're delving into Operation Fishbowl. Now, Operation Fishbowl was a series of high-altitude nuclear tests in 1962 that were carried out by the United States as part of a larger Operation Dominic nuclear test program. The Operation Fishbowl nuclear tests were originally planned to be completed during the first half of 1962, with 3 tests named Bluegill, Starfish, and Uraka. The first test attempt was delayed until June. Planning for Operation Fishbowl, as well as many other nuclear tests in the region, was begun rapidly in response to the sudden Soviet announcement on the 30th August 1961 that they were ending a 3-year moratorium on nuclear testing. The rapid planning of very complex operations necessitated many changes as the project progressed. Uraka was to be a low-yield test at very high altitude. The proposed Uraka test was always controversial, especially after the damage caused to satellites by the Starfish Prime detonation. As described below, Uraka was finally canceled, and an extensive reevaluation of Operation Fishbowl plan was made during an 82-day operation pause after Bluegill Prime disaster of July 25, 1962, as described below. All the tests were to be launched on missiles from Johnson Island in the Pacific Ocean north of the equator. Johnson Island had already been established as a launch site for United States high-altitude nuclear tests, rather than the other locations in the Pacific proving grounds. So yeah, these are nuclear bombs, unless you're like me and you question nuclear bombs or you don't believe in nuclear bombs. Yeah, that's a whole nother rabbit hole and a whole nother episode. In 1958, Louis Strauss, then chairman of the United States Atomic Energy Commission, opposed doing any high-altitude test at locations that had been used for earlier Pacific nuclear tests. His opposition was because of fears that the flash from the nighttime high-altitude detonations might blind civilians who were living on nearby islands. Johnston Island was a remote location, more distant from populated areas than other potential test locations. In order to protect residents of the Hawaiian Islands from flash blindness or permanent retinal injury from the bright nuclear flash, the nuclear missiles of Operation Fishbowl were launched generally toward the southwest of Johnston Island so that the detonations would be farther from Hawaii. A test named Kingfish was added during the early stages of Operation Fishbowl planning. 2 low-yield tests, Checkmate and Tightrope, were also added during the project, so the final number of tests in Operation Fishbowl were 5. The United States completed 6 high-altitude nuclear tests in 1958, but the high-altitude test of that year raised a number of questions. According to U.S. government report ADA 955694, on the first successful test of the Fishbowl series, previous high-altitude nuclear tests, Teak, Orange, and Yucca, plus the 3 Argus shots were poorly instrumented and hastily executed. Despite thorough studies of the meager data, present models of these bursts are sketchy and tentative. These models are too uncertain to permit extrapolation to other altitudes and yields with any confidence. Thus, there is a strong need not only for better instrumentation, but for further tests covering a range of altitudes and yields. There were three phenomena in particular that required further investigation. Number one, the electromagnetic pulse generated by a high-altitude nuclear explosion appeared to have very significant differences from the electromagnetic pulse generated by nuclear explosions closer to the surface. The associated with high altitude nuclear explosions, especially the auroras that appeared almost instantaneously far away from the explosion in the opposite hemisphere, were not clearly understood. The nature of the possible radiation belts that were initially generated along the magnetic field lines connecting the areas of the auroral displays were also poorly understood. Number three, areas of blackout of radio communication needed to be understood in much more detail, since that information would be critical for military operations during periods of possible nuclear explosions. The Fishbowl tests were monitored by a large number of surface and aircraft-based stations in the wide area around the planned detonations, and also in the region in the southern hemisphere in the Samoan Islands region, which was known in these tests as the Southern Conjugate region. Johnston Island is in the northern hemisphere, as were all of the planned Operation Fishbowl nuclear detonation locations. It was known from previous high-altitude tests, as well as from theoretical work done in the late 1950s, that high-altitude nuclear tests produce a number of unique geophysical phenomena at the opposite end of the magnetic field line of the Earth's magnetic field. According to the Standard Reference Book on Nuclear Weapons Effects by the United States Department of Defense, for the high-altitude test conducted in 1958 and 1962 in the vicinity of Johnston Island, the charged particles entered the atmosphere in the northern hemisphere between Johnston Island and the main Hawaiian Islands, whereas the conjugate region was in the vicinity of the Samoan, Fiji, and Tonga Islands. It is in these areas that the auroras were actually observed, in addition to those in the areas of the nuclear explosions. Beta particles are charged particles, usually with a negative electrical charge, that are released from nuclear explosions. These particles travel in a spiral along the magnetic field lines in the Earth's magnetic field. The nuclear explosions also release heavier debris ions, which also carry an electrical charge, and which also travel in a spiral along the Earth's magnetic field lines. The Earth's magnetic field lines are arced high above the Earth until they reach the magnetic conjugate area in the opposite hemisphere. According to the DoD Nuclear Weapons Effect Reference, because the beta particles have high velocities, the beta auroras in the remote southern hemisphere appeared within a fraction of a second of those in the hemisphere where the burst had occurred. The debris ions, however, travel more slowly, and so the debris aurora in the remote hemisphere, if it is formed, appears at somewhat later time. The beta auroras are generally most intense at an altitude of 30 to 60 miles, whereas the intensity of the debris auroras is greatest from 60 to 125 miles range. Remote conjugate beta auroras can occur in the detonation if the detonation is above 25 miles, whereas debris auroras appear only if the detonation altitude is in excess of some 200 miles. Some of the charged particles traveling along the Earth's magnetic field lines cause auroras and other geophysical phenomena in the conjugate areas. Other charged particles are reflected back along the magnetic field lines, where they can persist for long periods of time, up to several months or longer, forming artificial radiation belts. According to Operation Fishbowl, planning document of November 1961, since much valuable data can be obtained from time and spectrum resolved photography, this dictates that the tests be performed at nighttime when auroral photographic conditions are best. As with all U.S. Pacific high-altitude nuclear tests, all of the Operation Fishbowl tests were completed at night. This is in contrast to the Soviet high-altitude test of the K project, which were done over the populated land region of central Kazakhstan, and therefore had to be done during the daytime to avoid eye burn damage to the population from the very bright flash of high-altitude nuclear explosions, as discussed before. According to the initial plan of Operation Fishbowl, the nuclear tests were to be bluegill, starfish, and urraca, in that order. If a test were to fail, the next attempt of the same test would be of the same name plus the word prime. If bluegill failed, the next attempt would be bluegill prime. And if bluegill prime failed, the next attempt would be bluegill double prime, etc. And this is bluegill. The first planned test of Operation Fishbowl was on the 2nd of June 1962, when a nuclear warhead was launched from Johnston Island on a Thor missile just after midnight. Although the Thor missile appeared to be on a normal trajectory, the radar tracking system lost track of the missile. Because of the large number of ships and aircraft in the area, there was no way to predict if the missile was on safe trajectory. So the range safety officers ordered the missile with its warhead to be destroyed. No nuclear detonation occurred and no data was obtained. This is starfish. The second planned test of Operation Fishbowl was on 19 June 1962. The launch of a Thor missile with a nuclear warhead occurred just before midnight from Johnston Island. The Thor missile flew a normal trajectory of 59 seconds. Then the rocket engine suddenly stopped, and the missile began to break apart. The range safety officer ordered the destruction of the missile and the warhead. The missile was between 30,000 and 35,000 feet, between 9.1 and 10.7 kilometers in altitude when it was destroyed. Some of the missile's parts fell onto Johnston Island, and a large amount of missile debris fell into the ocean in the vicinity of the island. Navy Explosive Ordnance Disposal and Underwater Demolition Team swimmers recovered approximately 250 pieces of the missile assembly during the next 2 weeks. Some of the debris was contaminated with plutonium. Non-essential personnel had been evacuated from Johnston Island during the test. Starfish Prime. On the 9th of July 1962, at 9 o'clock Coordinated Universal Time, which was 9 seconds after 10 p.m. So that's military time, so I apologize. On the 8th of July, Johnston Island local time, the Starfish Prime test was successfully detonated at an altitude of 400 kilometers, 250 miles. The coordinates of the detonation were 16 degrees, 28 minutes north latitude, 169 degrees, 38 minutes west longitude, 330 kilometers or about 18 miles southwest of Johnston Island. The actual weapon yield was very close to the design yield, which has been described by various sources at different values in the very narrow range of 1.4 to 1.45 megatons. The Thor missile carrying the Starfish Prime warhead actually reached an apogee maximum height of about 1,100 kilometers, just over 680 miles, and the warhead was detonated on its downward trajectory when it had fallen into the programmed altitude of 400 kilometers, 250 miles. The nuclear warhead detonated at the 13 minutes and 41 seconds after liftoff of the Thor missile. Starfish Prime caused an electromagnetic pulse, an EMP, which was far larger than expected, so much larger that it drove much of the instrumentation off scale, causing great difficulty in getting accurate measurements. The Starfish Prime electromagnetic pulse also made those effects known to the public by causing electrical damage in Hawaii, about 1,445 kilometers, 900 miles away from the detonation point, knocking out about 300 streetlights, setting off numerous burglar alarms and damaging a telephone company microwave link. The detonation time was 9 seconds after 11 p.m. in Hawaii. Imagine trying to sleep through that bullshit, man. I'd be pissed. A total of 27 small rockets were launched from Johnston Island to obtain experimental data from the shot, with the first of the support rockets being launched 2 hours and 45 minutes before the launch of the Thor missile carrying the nuclear warhead. Most of these smaller instrumentation rockets were launched just after the time of the launch of the main Thor missile carrying the warhead. In addition, a large number of rocket-borne instruments were launched from a firing area at Barking Sands, Kauai, in the Hawaiian Islands. A very large number of United States military ships and aircraft were operating in support of Starfish Prime in the Johnston Island area and across the nearby North Pacific region. A few military ships and aircraft were also positioned in the southern conjugate region for the test, which was near the Samoan Islands. In addition, an uninvited scientific expeditionary ship from the Soviet Union was stationed near Johnston Island for the test, and another Soviet scientific expeditionary ship was located in the southern conjugate region. After the Starfish Prime detonation, bright auroras were observed in the detonation area, as well as in the southern conjugate region on the other side of the equator from the detonation. According to one of the first technical reports, the visible phenomenon due to the burst were widespread and quite intense. A very large area of the Pacific was illuminated by the auroral phenomenon from the far south of the South Magnetic Conjugate Area, Tongatapu, though the burst area too far north of the North Conjugate Area, French frigate Shoals. At twilight after the burst, resonant scattering of the light from lithium and other debris was observed at Johnson and French frigate Shoals for many days, confirming the long-time presence of debris in the atmosphere. An interesting side effect was that the Royal New Zealand Air Force was aided in anti-submarine maneuvers by the light from the bomb. The Starfish Prime radiation belt persisted at high altitude for many months and damaged the United States satellite Aerial Track Transit 4B, Injun 1, Telstar 1. It also damaged the Soviet satellite Cosmos 5. All of these satellites failed completely within several months of the Starfish detonation. There is also evidence that the Starfish Prime radiation belt may have damaged the satellites Explorer 14, Explorer 15, and Relay 1. Once again, That's if you believe in satellites, and a lot of flat earthers don't. They believe in satelloons, which are balloons that hold satellites. So Telstar 1 lasted the longest of the satellites that were clearly damaged by the Starfish Prime radiation, with its complete failure occurring on February 21, 1963. In 2010, the United States Defense Threat Reduction Agency issued a report that had been written in support of the United States Commission to assess the threat to the United States from electromagnetic pulse attack. The report, entitled Collateral Damage to Satellites from an EMP Attack. This reminds me, honestly, of what the fuck was it? We did a whole episode on it. It's one of those new Cyber Polygon. This reminds me literally of Cyber Polygon. Discusses in great detail the satellite damage caused by the Starfish Prime, artificial radiation belts, as well as other historical nuclear events that caused artificial radiation belts and their effects on many satellites that were then in orbit. The same report also projects the effects of one or more present-day high-altitude nuclear explosions upon the formation of artificial radiation belts and the probable resulting effects on satellites that were in orbit as of the year 2010. On July 25, 1962, a second attempt was made to launch the Bluegill device. Due to a sticking valve, the Thor missile malfunctioned after ignition of the rocket engine, but before leaving the launch pad, the range safety officer destroyed the nuclear warhead by radio command, with the missile still on the launch pad. The Thor missile then exploded, causing extensive damage in the area of the launch pad. Although there was no danger of an accidental nuclear explosion, the destruction of the nuclear warhead on the launch pad caused extensive contamination of the area by alpha-emitting radioactive materials. Burning rocket fuel flowing through the cabled trenches caused extensive chemical contamination of the trenches and the equipment associated with the cabling in the trenches. The radiation contamination on Johnston Island was determined to be a major problem, and it was necessary to decontaminate the entire area before the badly damaged launch pad could be rebuilt. Operation Fishbowl test operations stopped after the disastrous failure of Bluegill Prime, and most of the personnel not directly involved in the radioactive cleanup and launch pad rebuild on Johnston Island returned to their home stations to await the resumption of tests. According to the Operation Dominic 1 report, the enforced pause allowed DoD to replan the remainder of the Fishbowl series. The Uraka event was canceled to avoid further damage to satellites, and 3 new shots were added. A second launch pad was constructed during the operations pause so that Operation Fishbowl could continue in the event of another serious accident. Well, we'll wrap it up there. Thank you for tuning in. Please like, share, and subscribe. If you are listening on YouTube and you would like to listen audio only, so that way you can save your phone battery, you can find us on Breaker, Google Podcasts, Radio Public, Spotify, and Anchor. If you're listening on audio only and you would like to put a face to a voice, you can find us on YouTube, and that's Conspiracy Corner Podcast, and the profile picture is a dream catcher. But thanks again for tuning in. Please like, share, and subscribe, and you all have an awesome day.
We are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret society, opposed to secret oaths, opposed to secret proceedings. No official of my administration whether his rank is high or low, would interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know.